Well, hello, Keisha. It's so good to see you again.
Hello, Leighton, and hello, puppies.
This is Po and this is Cheeto. And they behave, and I won't have to put them away, but we'll see how this goes. Typically, at this point when I have a new guest on, I ask them to introduce themselves and give us your background and basically your story on how you ended up getting here to this place.
Yeah, sure. My name is Keisha Ernst, and I suppose the reason I'm here today, that part of my work is around composting. So I have a compost facility in Northern California, Nevada City, called Catalyst BioAmendments. And we're notable just because we do things a little bit differently than your traditional compost operation. We're not a green waste facility. We don't collect waste from outside. Most of our materials are grown on site or purchased. We like to have ultimate control over everything that we put into our compost because our goal isn't to reduce waste, it's to actually grow microorganisms. So we're looking at bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes, and other organisms like microarthropods, and trying to make sure that our compost is actually a more of an ecosystem than a pile of organic material, although it is also a pile of organic material. Technically, we get roped in with all of our other composting, and fairly enough, you could accidentally make microbes really easy. We just do it with purpose. We use microscopes to gauge our processes, and we don't sell compost unless we see, everybody living in it. I came to that work through Elaine Ingham. She's a teacher of so many people, almost everyone I work with. I know Leighton as well was a student of Elaine or a friend of Elaine. So we've been doing collaborative work with her. We went to her school. And basically what happened was we were consumers of compost. So I was trying to find compost using my microscope that had everything living in it that I was seeing in wild forest systems, and that didn't happen. So, unbeknownst to me, I turned into a compost producer. It wasn't ever the plan, but here we are today. Um, and yeah, I guess over time, people have started to use our product. They really like it. They're seeing a lot of the microorganisms from our compost grow out in their soil. And I really think we're able to get a foothold in this industry all because there are a lot of people out there that are now looking with, not only microscopes at their soil, but using DNA analysis and other data analytics methods to see what's alive. So, Leighton has been just a great new friend of ours. We bonded around compost. He's a compost producer as well, and I think that's how I got roped into being here today. We have a lot in common.
Well, that suited you right in. Yeah, so I had the same experience. I left Rodale after 18 months of 3 to 4 days a week of intensive understanding and learning about compost, vermicompost, compost extracts, teas, etc. And like you, I went out to get some and I couldn't. And by default, I had to produce my own. And that led into bigger and bigger and more production based on project size to a point where I got trapped out here in Cali and ended up, collaborating with Pete Hill on projects that I had, and then that elevator or escalated into helping him understanding what I was talking about and producing products for him, for his clients. So very, very similar stories.
Great.
One of the things that really intrigued me about you and Casey was when we were in Las Vegas, and I actually posted a clip. I took about 4 or 5 of them, but the one that I posted was you talking about, if we had time, I would make everybody go out and collect a bucket of as much diversity as they could possibly find. And then we would compost that. And I was like, I love these two. I'm done. I love them. I mean, that's all I preach. So we won't spend too much time there because I really want to talk to you more about, the involvement of DNA and how that's really starting to unlock some of the further mysteries of why this stuff does what it does in so many levels. So what is your experience with the DNA side of it?
Oh my gosh, I'm just so I'm an infant in that world. So don't expect me to
We all are.
Too much clarity. But I mean, honestly, I started working with biome makers. They're out of Sacramento, I believe, is their facility. And that was the first time we analysis and they do an interesting thing in the way they present the data, where they show you, of the species that they can find. You're seeing the diversity of fungi and bacteria. It doesn't really note the protozoa or nematodes, but what they do is, of the different species they know, and they know what their function is. They actually separate them out into these different percentages and charts on the report. And these are really expensive reports. They're like $400 to $700. So we don't do them very often. But what I found to be really interesting is a lot of the bacteria and the fungi that we had in our compost were okay in salt. They're salt tolerant organisms. And a lot of the work that we do is actually with these really large scale farmers. So we're coming into these systems where they're not necessarily organic growers. They're conventional farmers. They're concerned about the amount of pesticides they're adding. They're concerned about their workers. They're concerned about the cost of the inorganics just going up. Everything's going up in price. And so they're using the compost extracts and teas, and it's working so well at such a low amount. And I really believe it's that bacteria, that fungi, those foundational organisms are able to chew up that salt that's just laden throughout their soil, right? That's one of the big issues we have. And so I really do like the idea of getting that data that more points to why. I mean, we know it works. We all know it works. We've been playing with it for years, but exactly what is it in this compost that's so successful in this one location, or why is it successful over multiple locations? It's really fun to look at. And then in the future we're trying to look at these localized microorganisms that are growing in I don't want to say undamaged areas, but if we're looking at, say, fire, disaster relief from fire and regeneration after fire, we can go to these more wild areas that have not been burned yet. We can look at, what microorganisms are living there, and then we can use those to regenerate these previously burned areas, or to gain clues about, what we need to put back in place. That's specific. So the work that I do is really broad. It's just like yours. I'm not really looking down to species. I'm using my microscope just to identify diversity. And what you were talking about from the workshop, like, that's really the word I overuse, is diversity. I say it all the time, but it is this idea that if we have diversity, we have resiliency, and that's the one thing we need to focus on now. But with all these other abilities that we have that are getting less expensive through time, I think DNA analysis is going to be really exciting in the future. And I think I'll have a lot more to say about it in probably 3 years. Give me some time to develop my language.
Oh man, so yeah, I basically have been getting waterboarded for about 6 months now. Like, no choice. Like, I had to go down the rabbit hole for a client, and so you have to learn a whole new language. And it's not an intuitive language. It's very complex. It's kind of like root languages, like Latin. One of the interesting things is we started with biomakers, and then we moved on to Mr. DNA. And the reason why is, in many ways, biomakers is like the auto dealership, right? So you go in there, you deal with a salesperson. If you know how to ask the right questions, you can get a better service package, or maybe you can get the extra factory bonus. And where Mr. DNA is kind of like the master mechanic. So he's tinkering. He knows every part. He knows every different function of the different cars, and how to trick them out, or how to modify them to be more economical. And so we learned very quickly that both offer unique services, but both don't overlap. Like, for one, B crop 2.5, I think it is, or is it 4.5? I forget, from biomakers. Super cool. They take the bacteria and classify them into solubilizers or degraders, so that you can actually say, okay, if you have this volume of bacteria, you're going to have this much calcium available, or this much potassium available. I don't know if you got into the
I don't think I've done that one. I know the last time I spoke with them, they were talking about how there was another test that was actually slightly less expensive than what we went through.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one. No, I haven't played with it yet. It sounds interesting.
Cool. So yeah, that one's really valuable. We had a client who had a fertilizer industry. Now, again, I'm talking about a client that hired me as a consultant. They brought to me a gentleman who has a fertilizer business, who grows all his own food, all his own meat products. They won't even eat out at restaurants, maybe once or twice a year, because they're that fixated on having, clean, super clean food. And he was interested in this product, which is actually called the Muncher, because it would allow him to use his own organic inputs and liquefy them, and then use them as a extract on his property. And so his first question out of his mouth was, "What's the NPK?" And at first, I got insulted, and I'll be honest with you, I was insulted. I was like, "Dude, we're talking about biology. You told me that you understand soil food web principles. Why would you ask me the NPK?" And it forced me to realize, like, hey, I can't be mad at him, because at least he starting to understand the chemistry side. That's one whole part. The other whole part is the physical, sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. And the last is the biology. And without those three pieces, you can't talk intelligently about growing anything, right? So we also went down the rabbit hole. All right, someone asked me, what's the NPK? First thing I say to them is, oh, okay, so let's talk about CNPK. And they're like, well, what's C? Carbon. Well, I know I've been hearing a lot about carbon and CO2 harvesting and, the importance of carbon in the soil, but what does that mean? I said, well, to be honest, if you're using NPK and you have no carbon, the vast majority of what you're putting on your field washes away, because without carbon, the organisms can't metabolize those synthetics. And they're like, oh, that's why I spend more and more every year. And I'm like, yeah, because they're burning the little carbon you have up to process that NPK. Sooner or later, you're going to hit net zero, and it doesn't matter how much you put on that soil, especially if you're tilling up the roots and oxidizing them. Yeah. And so it really puts a dawn in people's mind who are just synthetic NPK people. And then I say to them, okay, so here's the real question. What does C pre-NPK plus biology mean? And then they go, oh, whoa, what are you talking about? I go, well, pre-NPK, that means before NPK was ever used. Carbon and biology created the Garden of Eden. You don't need NPK. Then the light bulbs go off, right? Now I've got their attention. Now they're willing to listen about biology, because normally when I bring up soil biology, I get the eyes glazed over. I'm sure you know that.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But in the same note, I would say that the NPK, that whole traditional thinking, has a place during transition, because it's very rare that we see a situation with a farm where we're able to, unless they're starting from the very beginning. I mean, we've had farmers that are like, we have bare ground, we're going to do everything you say, we're going to transition. I feel like I want to apologize for the sound of that mower, because it keeps coming by the window. I don't know if you guys can hear it.
No, we can't hear it. You're
okay,
fine.
Good. They're doing work outside. But yeah, there's this transition period where, often when we're applying biology, like when we're talking 6,000 acres, it's so minute what we're putting out. And so there is this transition period where it's like, we really do need to understand, do we have nutrient cycling happening? At what rate? Are we able to tell the farmer, okay, let's cut all inputs right now? When we consult, we typically don't work that way. We're using their same system that they've always used, but we've started to use plant sap analysis a little bit more as a gauge to say, what's the plant taking up right now? And like, okay, so we've got plenty of nitrogen coming in, or too much. Let's dial back that input. But, I'm yet to find a farmer that's ready to just like cut inputs. If they are a traditional farmer, whether they love microbes and understand the process at all, oftentimes they're still not ready. They want more proof. So this is where, like, the DNA analysis, the plant sap analysis, total nutrient analysis, chemistry, when we pair everything together, I think it makes our job easier, just because the farmer feels like, okay, there's a little bit more data on my side showing, yeah, I can reduce these inputs now. We've had a few that from the very beginning just want to cut it and go, but Those guys are rare.
I've had exactly one that said that, and the only reason he did it was because of Ukraine. He had enough money to put down one application, but he didn't have enough to put the second down. And if he didn't put the second down, then he wasted all the money on the first one and all the seed and all the diesel. And so he was incredibly fearful. I spoke with him daily. I mean, literally handholding, don't worry, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And sure enough, it was at the end of the season. He actually had an increase in yield, as well as a significant increase in the nutritional value of corn. Unfortunately, he sells on a traditional market, so it doesn't matter. I've tried to push him to get into the feed market, where he can show that he has an increase in nutrient value, decrease in feed necessary, but it's difficult. He's a traditional farmer, right? So they kind of want to stay in their comfort zones. So I totally hear what you're saying, and I just figured I'd share that with you because it helps the farmer really understand that, wait a minute, C is a huge important part of the whole picture. And maybe I do need to put more compost down, or till in bigger chunks, or let the residues stay intact and not till them. But those are those little management tricks that once they start to get comfortable with, just kind of help build that process a lot quicker.
Have you seen any of the stuff that Corey Miller puts out? He's a farmer out of Montana.
Yes.
I really love his presentations when he looks at his organic material percentage and then compares it to like how quickly his microorganisms are coming up to minimum values, and then looks at like how many days he doesn't have to water through the year, and then equates that to money. It's like I love his presentations. They're genius. They speak to farmers in a way that I don't know, I've never been able to. I mean, he is a farmer, so it makes sense. But I really like looking at how he lays all this, traditional data analysis mixed with the biology, kind of all together, and then following those trends. We need more Corey Millers in the world.
Amen. I'm actually working with a woman out here, Christina from 301 Organics.
Oh, I know Christine.
Yeah. She's doing a webinar a month from today.
Okay.
And trying to get the word out because it's all about soil health. Like, finally, someone's talking soil health. It's like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
And Corey's on her podcast.
Oh, cool. Good. Yay.
So getting the word out, right? And I just connected her this morning with a community up here. I don't know. Do you know Rincon Vitova Insectary? Ron Whitehurst?
It's ringing a bell. I should know them. They're local here?
Yeah, they're right in Ventura.
Oh, I should know them. I want to take a little tour.
Yeah. So Ron and Jan have been advocating reduced pesticides through regulatory for years, right? And Christine and I were talking this afternoon, just before I got on the podcast, about how frustrating the regulatory body is, and how the haulers are really kind of monopolizing all the green waste and food waste in a manner to make them more money, with no concern for the actual value of it. And unfortunately, the regulatory bodies now, fortunately, we have a new wave of younger people who are coming in and being, forced to deal with this, the SBA, whatever that food waste one was, 16S or. Anyway, the new kids. Again?
The SB 1383.
Yes, exactly. I'm brain dead at this point on Monday. Monday's
life right now. All year.
So, the counties are like, okay, we got to deal with this, and the old timers are retiring, the new guys are coming in. And they're like, trying to take their job seriously. Like, all right, well, this is going to be a big issue. I mean, supposedly they're going to put teeth in it and starting next year. But I mean, that was supposed to happen January.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, they keep getting extensions. I know our small town that we live in up north, one of One of the areas got a 5-year extension. It keeps happening that it gets pushed, but I mean, I kind of want to stand up here for the haulers and for waste management. I keep hearing like they keep getting like all the bad press here, like, oh, the haulers are the ones that are messing it up, or oh, it's the dump, or it's waste management. But I mean, I want to poke at our local government a little bit here and say, hey, like it's actually our cities and our counties that make these laws. And they don't allow us to heat up compost. I'm so lucky to have the special little teeny restrictive permit that I have in Nevada County. I mean, the county gave that to us. I think it's even got a weird name like educational compost permit. They just kind of made it happen so that we could do it. But I mean, you have to understand how hard it is to just be able to have a hot compost pile. Just that by itself, in most of our counties, most of our cities, the restrictions are insane. So in some counties, you have to have a 50 to 80-foot ditch that surrounds the entire property. I mean, I know for us personally, just the water management plan that we have to have is the exact same one that our local military base has.
Mm-hmm.
And they have gnarly toxic chemicals of all kinds. We work with wood chips, a teeny amount of manure, seeds, and grass. That's it. You know, there's nothing crazy coming off of our lot ever. Even our oil and all of the fluids we use in our machines are like the highest grade you can get. And what we have to go through to actually heat up compost is insane. And now look at like the fact that we're not allowed to have any of those materials dropped off. Like I believe that there would be a way to regulate and just alter the system slightly where it's not like, oh, we're changing it. The haulers aren't making money. We're stealing from waste management. No, the tiny producers like me, like us, really. I mean, you're on a small lot too. We don't need a lot. We don't need to take so much from the whole that it's going to crash the system. Honestly, what we need to do is there needs to be an understanding that there's a difference between reduced waste compost and that compost is important because we're the ones making the waste, right? We're the ones putting our cans out there every week. We're the ones making the disaster. Waste management are the ones that are actually cleaning it up. So, you know, this got dumped on waste management and now everyone's trying to figure it out. The haulers, I believe, could just haul. They make money for driving organic materials from one place to the next. So it's like, if little people like us could actually get some of the best materials, you know, we're really specific about what we use. You know, tiny contracts could satisfy, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of farmland. So, I mean, I believe in the future, like making space where the actual our local governments give us a little bit of wiggle room to have these places where we can compost because it's not stinky the way we do it. It's aerobic composting. It's not like the dump. So there's a lot of education that has to happen like in the legalization of just making the compost. So
Legalization of compost
that's
making.
right. It's right.
What?
Right now, everything at scale, if you're making money, you have to have a permit like Peach Hill does. You know, no one has permits for this. It is essentially illegal, but it's not like I don't think it's the haulers that are just like, no, this is like these are branches of the government not talking to one another. And it's just like almost impossible to get through it, right? But not impossible. People are starting to listen, you know, our community, like our local government's coming to us to talk to us now. Like that's hopeful. So I don't know. I'm hoping the haulers can just make a detour and drop us some chips. Like I know it sounds crazy, but like we all have GPS. They can just boop right off, drop a load with us, go back and take everything else to the machine, right?
Oh, I love it. I friggin' love it. Illegal composting. But you're right.
I
It
am.
would, it would take 10 years and at least a million, if not more, if I wanted to open a facility and I would be fighting NIMBY, not in my backyard, from everybody around me. And it's just, that goes back to education. It has to be, you know, I was horrified when I crash landed here 2 days before COVID. And I saw everybody putting out these green bins and I'm like, what are those? Right. And I go out and look at them. I'm like, oh my God, they're taking this stuff away. And I started like unloading people's green bins. And my partner, Pauline, was like, Leighton, what are you doing? I'm like, look, I can make compost. Phil, look at all this grass clippings. And you know, eventually I calmed down and went, all right, Leighton, take a breath. You know, you're going to make your own here on this property. So just don't let any of it go off your site. But I was horrified to see, because there's nobody's property should be removing anything. they're actually degrading their soils by taking it away. Why wouldn't you use a mulch mower? Why would you do a bag mower out here, right? And so that educational piece is critical. And I, praise Christine for the work that she's doing,
Yeah.
because she's dealing with the regulatory, the hauler, she's dealing with the whole big picture, and understands that, without educating these various branches of the government, we're never going to get anywhere. It's never going to change. And I mean, there could be incentives like, if you do not take a green can and you allow your landscaper to chip up everything and return all the grass clippings to your grass, then you get a tax deduction,
Yeah.
right? Simple things like that could be so easy to implement. And let's face it, you start talking about money and you get everybody's attention. I don't care who you are. I don't care how wealthy you are. You start saying, let's talk money. And the hardest part is savings, because people just don't get saving a dollar is a dollar earned. I think they're starting to come around to that fact, but if you just start talking money, people listen. And again, what you're doing, and last year you traveled the country putting on workshops and awareness demonstrations. That was freaking huge. That was huge what you guys did. And so, yeah, you are very much in the same way that she is. You're trying to get the awareness out, and I really want to promote that last post. I believe it was your last post that you put up about how you're brainstorming on how to figure out how to cut costs, or take donations, or have people pledge a certain amount of money so that you can give it to the farmer. So please, let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it all leads to that. So, really similar. Christine and I were just on the phone about this last week, right? This is the same issue we have here. We have up north. So there's this great grant that, and I mean, I think when they wrote this bill, they had this good idea that, like, okay, all of the organic material is not going to go to the dump. It's going to go to a central composting area. They're going to compost it. It's going to come back to farmers. And then they come up with, a huge amount of money to give grants to these farmers to say, okay, so when you buy compost, it's costing usually what, $50, $100 a ton if you're talking about, really expensive from a large facility, and they're giving $30 per ton. So as a grant. And so if you're getting that large scale bulk inexpensive compost, it's a really great system, because the farmers are able to get almost all of their compost just completely covered by this grant. Issue being, like, so we're a permitted compost facility in Nevada County. Our compost is $750 a yard. I know, sticker shock price, it's insane. But when you buy your ingredients and you don't get paid to take ingredients, that's just what the price tag looks like, unfortunately. So we got in this position where we have farmer groups, we have farmers that are interested, we have locals that are interested, and they want our compost in the system. And we're just looking at this and going, I can't ask a farmer to pay $1,400 a yard. And I mean, really, it's a different product, right? We're not buying 5 yards of our compost and putting it out on an acre. Our large scale 2,000 acre farms are only buying a yard at a time. But this is an education gap that's really hard to fill in a quick phone call, because my name's been put on a list somewhere. So what ends up happening now is I get these quick phone calls all the time of farmers expecting $50 a yard compost, and then me just, giving them way too much information. But what ended up happening is we were inspired, because what I kept saying over and over again is, you just don't need that much. Your farm's not that big. You just don't need that much. And eventually I was like, oh, right, Keisha, they don't need that much. Like, their farm's not that big. You can probably just give them the compost. So we figure, like, 10 yards of compost can cover this insane amount of area. And so the only thing that's really missing for us is the ability to spray it, which costs money. We have to have laborers, we have machines, but for little input, really little input, we're thinking, like, we're going to have pizza parties and workshops and community education events where people can donate to this, and we can just go to those producers, those small scale farms that are selling to our local grocery stores, selling to our local farmers markets, selling CSAs to local families. And goodness, our local farms that are donating to the food bank, whoa, they're the most important people in the world. They're giving free food out all on their own dollar. So we just kind of had this realization that if we want this to happen, like we're going to have to pay for it, and we're going to figure it out because there's money out there. And I know for myself, like I care about, my food being high quality more than anything else. Like if you look at my budget, that's where all my food goes, is high quality, or all my money goes is to high quality food. And I know a lot of people feel that way. So it's like, we're just going to try to flip it and say, all right, what can we do this year? What can we make happen? Hopefully we see changes, we get good stories, we get more community involvement. And, maybe next year we can cover 3 farms or 4 farms. We've identified 6 that are big major players in Nevada County. And there's probably, 15 or 20 more that we're not even thinking about. So there's so much that we're up against, besides like the farms don't even know we're doing this yet. Like it's just the plan came out of nowhere and we started talking about it. So it feels really grassroots and organic, but I don't know, I guess just this idea of like, I don't think we can wait for bureaucracy. I don't think we can wait for grants. I don't think we can wait anymore. So we're just going to try to carve out some time to make it happen and see if we can find other people to do the same. And maybe that'll get their attention, and some of those, big bucks will come to figure out how we can, really improve composting at scale across the board.
Beautifully well said. And that's why I do this podcast, is we don't have time. People are like, even my daughter was like, Dad, you have an anti-business model. I'm like, yeah, I know. Because if somebody doesn't step up and really start to make people aware and give them stuff and help them in every way, shape, or form to move the needle, then we're all screwed. We don't have time for another Bill Gates or another Elon Musk. We don't. That game is over. And those guys aren't listening to the real needs of the whole population of the planet. Like how do we fix this stuff? And so I agree with you 100%. And I know I spoke to you off air about trying to get you to come down and spend some time down here, because all your inputs are free. Your water's free. I'll be there to keep an eye on it after you finish making it. And then, I know Rob, I've talked to him. He'd be willing to probably take a complete tax donation or tax write-off for the work that we did, and be happy to get rid of the material, because, he's not as bad as Agromin. Agromin literally dumps 80% of their green waste because they can't get rid of it. Nobody wants to buy it because they kill things, but that's another story, right? Their product is a wonderful herbicide. Like it kills everything, but it puts carbon in the soil. So that brings back the indigenous microbes, which is beneficial, right? And I know like there are other, like, interestingly enough, and this is something else that's off topic, but I definitely want to talk to you about it. I was hired by Agromin because they keep getting requests for fungally dominant compost, right? So as soon as I hear the word fungally dominant, I know, oh, okay, somebody's trying to educate themselves. Fungally dominant isn't the correct terminology, but at least they're on the right track, right? So I sit down with the big boys and I go, all right, Bill and Dave, based on my walkthrough of your process, you're making hyperthermophilic compost. You can't just mix everything together and expect it not to just like melt down, right? And I know you guys water the hell out of it and turn the hell out of it. And God bless it, when you turn it, it reeks to high heaven. And I know you're blowing off all your nitrogen. So in order for me to turn your product into a fungally dominant or biocomplete or biointensive compost, I've got to figure out how to arrest the thermophilic process, because you're using way too many greens. And they're like, okay, what do you need? And I gave them a budget. And then I went around playing with minerals. So I played with gypsum, I played with quicklime, I played with stone dust, a specific dust that I knew was very high in calcium and magnesium, and spent lenodite fines. And I figured out a recipe where I could literally shut down the thermophilic process almost within a day, and with no water, which is even crazier. And so we sent the test results out. We did a side by side, same size piles. sent it out for chemistry, biology, the full workup. And when we finished the project, I went in and did a presentation to them and showed them the test data results. And ironically, Billy, the CEO, was like, wow, you took our compost that was 0.501 and turned it into a 4.521. You made an organic fertilizer. And I'm like, yeah, I know. That's not only did I shut it down and now I can inoculate it, but I made a high fertilizer value out of it. And Dave Green piped up and said, oh, that's a problem. You changed the bulk density. And I'm like, yeah, so? He goes, well, that means when I truck a 80-yard walking floor to a farmer, he's going to be like, you're ripping me off. It's only 3/4 full.
Yeah, you can't take 80 yards.
I'm like, Dave.
I wish I could fit 80 yards in a walking floor trailer.
Right. So I said, Dave, after they use it once, their trees are going to explode and they're going to want that. They're not going to want the other stuff that really doesn't do much. There's very little plant reaction. It's just you're giving them a place to dump this stuff, right? So you're dumping for free anyway. And imagine if their trees exploded, they'd be like, oh, dump more of that. Oh, now you can charge $5 a yard for it, my friend, right? So this whole like potential for taking even the worst, and again, I'm using the term worst because all right, we should talk about compost in stages. Compost is a process, it's not a product, right? So the first stage of compost is grinding it up. That's what you guys do. You have that big turner, throw all the inputs in the pile, and you grind it up. You've turned those organic inputs into ground up organic matter, or GOM, right? And the second phase of composting, when you are through the thermophilic into the mesophilic, is basically called POM, particulate organic matter, because you know what I'm talking about. You stick your hand in there, there's some chunky pieces too, but there's a lot of small ones. So it's more readily available. There's more surface area. It's easier for microbes to break it down. You've already started to get humic and folic acid formation. And then the final step of composting is what's called MOAM, mineral associated organic matter. And that's basically where this product can last, instead of just 30 to 90 days, or maybe a year if you're really lucky. This product will last for hundreds of years in the soil and provide that nutrition for the microbes to break down and feed back to the plant. So it's like really super cured compost. And somewhere in the middle between POM and MOAM is where we find ourselves, you and I, where we're in the biological window. Biological window doesn't last that long, although interestingly enough, and I probably will have proof of this within the next few months, 6 months max, that in high level protozoa production, that sweet spot where your compost is just blowing out the organisms, you get to a certain point where that bell curve starts to fall off and you're not producing as many visible protozoa that you were 15 days, 20 days before. But I'm pretty confident that we're producing cysts, and that these organisms, they're still producing, but they're producing so many that some of that portion of that they're producing are just going right into cyst form because it's not perfect. And then when you put them in the perfect environment, they'll wake back up.
That's interesting. I'm curious about the moisture level, because I've heard a lot of most compost people say that the biological level goes up until about like 6 months or to a year and a half. Everyone has a different opinion there, and then it starts to go back down. That's the opposite of what I've seen. I see it go up to about, I've never seen it drop before. We had compost that has lasted for 2.5 years on our lot, and that compost at the 2.5 year mark was so good, I almost didn't want to sell it, just because the numbers that were coming out of it were so high that I couldn't replicate it again without a year and a half. Like we had Brian Vogg's one of our consultants that buys our product, and some of his customers were just like, the next load we got, they're just like, what's wrong with this compost? So, the other had just aged to 2.5 years, but we care for our product we care for our compost like you care for a dog. So we water it we check to water. Sometimes the dog water bowl is full. We don't have to water, to be fair, but we check every day. And so I've only seen it go up. And the fungal to bacterial ratio went higher, but our bacterial populations were still high enough to really just keep even the bacterial nematodes happy, and our protozoa is still producing too. So I'm curious if that's like maybe the moisture going down after X amount of time, and then protozoa numbers just kind of falling off, because it's pretty dry down here.
Yes, it is. It is.
Especially where you're at.
Oh my God, Keisha, I used to make compost in New England.
Oof, nice.
Water was not an issue.
Exactly.
It was harder to keep the water off of it. I had to cover crop my compost piles just so it would shed water.
That works great too. That's like a good pro tip that people should write down.
And I used to go out and dig up shrubs, and I would dig up like mushrooms. I would dig up ferns, like all these different plants. And I would plant the southern side of the compost pile with bacterial dominant, like grasses and certain flowers. And on the northern side, I would plant it with oak seedlings, pine seedlings, little fungus clumps that I'd gotten. And oh my God, that compost was just killer. But that's off topic. So
it's cool. You're making a border zone there, actually. So
yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, I used to get too crazy making that stuff.
I'm sure we could fall down many rabbit holes.
Oh God, yes. And that was another thing I loved about you guys. You talked about intention. Making compost with intention. And that I think is like huge. But I don't want to get too far off topic. So in my experience, and maybe it's because I'm working with materials that are more processed, they're not as chunky because they've already gone through pathogen reduction, they've gone through screening. So I'm getting more of the fine stuff and not the big chunky chips.
Oh,
so it might be part of it. Now, have you ever say again?
That's it. Yeah, we work with a lot of the big guys, and like the number one problem that they have is that to get to heat, they chop it down to teeny pieces, and then it gets hot for like 3 years. It just stays hot consistently.
Yeah.
Once you alter your input materials to only take in certain types of wood, and you get the chunks bigger, it goes that a lot of those problems just like
vanish.
Away. And it stores for a long time, right? You've got your airspace in there now.
Right.
So all your communities have, it's like, it still will collapse quite a bit, because if you've got good fungi, it's going to chew those chips up. It is a problem we have, and worms too show up and eat everything. But the chunkier, the more open you can have that compost pile, the longer it can sit. That makes more sense to me.
So, so have you ever done like had Andy or some other soil food web do a count on yours? I know that you're more than capable of doing it.
Oh yeah. People do counts on our product all the time, because like a lot of times they'll buy our compost so that they can do their final test at the soil food web school, or the soil food web school buy our compost. Like they just did a trial. Elaine Ingham did a trial a few months ago, and like, they're testing it frequently. We test it, and then we send it out to other labs too. Not so much like in the beginning, we did it a lot more. We would spare that expense to be like, I would test it. I'd send it to other labs. I would send it to who are the guys that everybody loves in Oregon?
Oh, Nick.
Well, yeah, Nick, of course. Nick's definitely done some assessments for us, but no, the lab, Earthfort.
Oh, Earthfort, sure.
We'd send out to Earthfort, so I would have like Earthfort's numbers, which are traditionally higher than like your normal soil food web lab, and then I would do my own evaluation and then send out to. But at a point, it gets exhausting, and it's like, how many times do you want to spend $150 for someone to say it's good? So now we do it quarterly. We don't assess as crazy as we used to.
Do you get up in the millions in protozoa?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I could pull up some. I've got our protozoa. So like if you were looking at it under a microscope, often you're going to see 2 to 6 protozoa per view anywhere you look in the screen. So yeah, definitely up into the millions.
Nice.
It's a lot. But I would say like if we don't water our piles, it'll get down to 1 or 2 per view, which would be, hundreds of thousands, I suppose.
Yep.
I'm not good at doing the conversion math in my head.
We're not going to do advanced mathematics today.
Yeah.
So So what I did was I was really interested in studying that bell curve, which I'd witnessed. As I like you, do all my qualitative microscope work, and I noticed that I did a project for Irvine. Remember we talked about
Yep.
that, and so I was gearing up for them. And in previous 6 months earlier, I had done some decent sized piles, 15, 20 yarders, and was observing qualitatively, like where was that bell curve, because I wanted to plan to have my compost ready for him hopefully at the peak, right? So that what he was getting was going to have the highest impact, because he was not going to only, we were going to apply it at the base of the root ball, but we were also going to liquefy it. So I wanted, again, to make sure you had the highest numbers possible. So I had Andy do a series of tests. And what we found is that somewhere between day 45 and day 65 was that sweet spot. And then after day 65, it started to drop down into the hundreds of thousands, or, seriously hundreds of thousands off of the millions. And so that made me start to go, okay, that, I validated it. Not only did I witness it, but I had her test it, and I love Andy, and I'm always like hiding things from her, and that she loves it, because she's like, well, if you told me, then I might, like skew the data. So she likes to keep in the dark, and then after she does the test, then I tell her what it was, and some of the backstory behind it. Again, Andy Marsh, Rhizos, .science, great.
Andy's great. She does some analysis for some of our clients.
Yeah, she's thorough. Her reports are amazing. They're not friggin' cookie cutter, boilerplate nonsense. They're detailed, specific to your specific job, which is, again, it's rare to find that level of competence and effort, for lack of better words, on someone who's in a production type business where they're, this is their job. They're punching stuff out. So needless to say, that was really interesting. And, it's funny that you say it's all about the particulate size. And I just recently been harvesting somebody brought in like probably 2 walking floors of chips that were at least a year, if not 2 years old. And I was like, oh my God. So every day I've been like running Bobcat loads as fast as I possibly can to get them out of the green waste pile so they don't get mixed up or shredded, right? And I just started blending them into some of the more refined piles that I had that were, I was getting up to 120. I'd flip them, get them down to 110, come in the next day, back up to 120. And I was like, damn it. I'm fighting this, and I'm adding water that knocks it back too, and then it comes right back up again. So I'm glad that you verified that's going to be very helpful for me in the future, is to be using some of these more chunkier, and I also have some really cool shredded stuff, which I don't know if you get up there. It's just that long, twisty, gnarly stuff.
I used it in Florida when we did our big build in Florida. And yeah, they do a lot, like almost. Well, a lot of it was different types of palm that had been shredded, and it was, and just other tropical plants. They've got a lot of, I think similar plantings there, and then that stuff was awesome. I really liked their wood chips in Florida. They were
they're different, right? They're different.
Oh, it's different. Yeah, I mean, this is just an idea I had, but we can't keep the piles moist there, although it rains and, there's so much water. Until the piles really started to break down, I couldn't get the organic material to suck in the water. And I think it's because all the plants grow in water, so they shed water instead of suck in water. Here, it's like you water a pile of wood chips, it drinks up the water right away. But there, no, not so much.
So interestingly enough, I found out that typically fresh chips have a moisture value around 50 to 55%, but that's the maximum they can hold until they start to decompose.
Yeah.
So I ran into that with Agriment. I was like frustrated as all heck trying to get water on this, to get it to pull in. And you're right, the water just sheds right through, goes down and turns into a giant anaerobic layer on the bottom, and it's a friggin' nightmare.
Yeah, for me, it was just like I just spent all my days, watering gently, so it just looked like back and forth, super slow. But once we got it, and it was some of the most beautiful compost we've made.
So
So
wax on, wax off.
yeah, the subtle nuances of keeping the microbes happy. So you said something interesting I want to ask you about is you try to keep your compost from being thermophilic. And we are absolutely like we keep ours between 131 and 155. You're down
So
below 120. So how are you doing your pathogen reduction and how are you?
we do that prior.
Oh, so you reduce the pathogen on the material and then you just
Then I
interesting.
harvest. Yeah, so then I go out and harvest it once it's gone through pathogen reduction. So, for instance, we get cocoa core, little cubes from a vertical farm in LA that's organic, and so those have already been pathogen reduced before I get them.
Cool.
Another thing is spent mushroom substrate. I don't know if you guys get that in your ingredients, but that's been sterilized before for the mushroom production.
We try not to work with sterile ingredients, Leighton.
Well, so bottom line is you're introducing the microbes, right?
Yeah.
So with spent mushroom substrate or SMS, I'm getting all the spores. I'm getting all of um, the the yeasts, and the yeasts are the precursor for the saprophytes. Like you should see how fungally rich the compost that I'm making right now is because of that stuff.
I'll have to
Like
see it.
it's kind of like IMO. Did you ever get into the natural farming scene?
I mean, I know about it. I'm getting more. I know what you're talking about when you say IMO. Yes.
Yeah, so the IMO collections. I had this conversation with Chris Trump back 8 years ago when I first met him,
Hmm.
and I'm like, dude, there's no saprophytes in your IMO. All this is like yeasts. And yeah, you're definitely getting some, protozoa. You're probably getting some fungal spores, but that white fluffy stuff is not mycelium. But that being said, that white fluffy stuff is the precursor for the saprophytes to take off. Without that, they can't do their job unless it's undisturbed, right? Problem is, we're always dealing with disturbed. We're not dealing with forest. And
The
in
IMO is interesting, right? Because they're using a single source, not everyone. I know some people that do some really, really, in my opinion, intelligent and interesting IMO mixes, right? Like, I'm trying to think.
microbes,
There's this guy on Marco. Do you know Marco?
yeah, microbes, yeah.
Marco's awesome. He does I've seen him using going to local grains and using more diversity of grains, but thinking about where that starting material comes from. I think that's really key. I haven't done much playing with it. I've seen a lot of the collections when I go do workshops and stuff. People will bring them in, and it is like you said, it's usually just the yeasts or some omycetes, or I rarely see protozoa, but some people make preps that are very interesting to look at under the microscope and quite diverse and have fungi. I think it depends really on what you're baiting them with. The idea to me that you can take white rice and put it anywhere and that's the best practice. I feel like it could be at least tailored a little bit to each place, what actually grows in each area. But yeah, I mean it's interesting stuff. And Chris Trump told me that once it goes through all the processes, right? Like IMO 1 through, is it 5?
Three.
1, 2,
Yeah,
3.
five
But
is the manure.
5 is
Four,
like well, and the end product is the compost, right? And Chris told me once you go through all of these different processes at the very end, you have a compost that is supposed to, under a microscope, have all these different categories of functional groups, right? I should see the diversity. So in the end, it's kind of all those processes are leading to the same thing. So I totally agree with it because the end product we can look at with a microscope and go yay or nay.
right.
That's for me the big thing.
I agree 100%. And I think,
Yeah.
that nothing against natural farming, believe me. I'm biodynamic, natural farming, JDOM, biocomplete, biodynamic, soil food. I'm all families, right? And I'm a big advocate of why are you guys arguing? Why are you not all coming together? You're all doing the same thing. It's just a different methodology. And it
Yeah.
frustrates the crap out of me, but that's here nor there. So
They just gotta argue. They can't let each other be.
Come on, we're all adults here. Let's play nice in the sandbox. Anyway, one of the things that is not made very clear is that when you're taking your IMO3 and adding it to soil, you have to have soil biology in the soil, or you're not going to get that explosive response that you typically see in a really well done IMO5, which is where you added the manure in. So there are some like intricacies that need to be really drilled home. Like if you really want to make a decent IMO4, you got to find soil that is either been fallow for 5 years, or something that has not been treated with any synthetics for 3 to 5 years,
Mm.
or you're just not going to get that end result that when you put it on the microscope, you're like, wow, this is good.
Yeah, well, it's gotta be there to collect it, and there is the idea that it's just the spores are all just laying there in the soil waiting, but if that certain nutrient source isn't waking it up and calling it to grow into it, you're not collecting anything, right? Even if it is, if that rice doesn't wake up whatever you're after, it's not gonna come into the box. So that is a good point. Like we've gotta it's almost like we need to regenerate it first and then then use scan it.
Like you, it's all about the inputs.
Yeah.
You crap in, crap out, right? So
Yeah.
those are the things that I think need to be really pounded home when you have these excited new students who are like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then they don't really take the time or put the intention in
Right.
to, make sure that they're shifting or using the real good inputs to get the results that they're desire. I
Yeah.
mean, again, the necromass is undeniable. There is necromass, like I told you about the worms in freaking Tony's parking lot, right? How the hell did I get worms in a parking lot? Well, it's called necromass. So it's there, but unless you have the really good stuff that's going to release that necromass, then you're not going to get it. So again, it's all about, the inputs and the intention.
Yeah.
And so back to thermophilic compost. So my biggest question that's been itching me, and I've had this conversation with Elaine, I don't know how many times, because every time I went, thermophilic went up to 150, 160, turned it, 150, 160, turned it. I would never see any nematodes. I would never see any saprophytic fungi, not during the turning process.
Really?
Yeah, never. Not at those high temps.
I have the exact opposite. Like I've actually brought
No.
this I've had the exact opposite experience because well, I hear this all the time and I happen to have a hot compost pile in my lot and a microscope lab right there and a big turner. I mean, so there's two reasons I do this. One, people talk poorly about the turners and they say, oh, well, the reason that large scale compost is poor is because the turners chop up the microbes. So we have two turners. One is a Mighty Mike, which like in fact is a chopping machine. The second is the Bacchus, which is like the most brilliant, soft, loving turner on the planet. And the second thing is the heat. So everyone says, well, you're going to kill your nematodes, you're going to lose diversity of bacteria, which, perhaps we do. But when you look at the DNA of our compost, we have extraordinarily diverse bacteria compared to other composts that have been tested. So I'll go out right as the compost turns and I will grab just a piece and put it under the microscope. And like without doubt, there's going to be nematodes. I'm going to see fungi. I'm going to see protozoa. Everybody's there. The one thing that you'll see that we see more during that heat process is clear colorless fungi or omycetes, perhaps. Hard to tell. And I think what it is like just very, very fast growth. And so we're seeing a lot of clear colorless actinobacteria, even like just in mass. And we also see more ciliates. We see more rotifers and just interesting things during that heat up process. But they're all at home. I mean, I can run an analysis sometimes. Like one of the piles we did in Florida was on its fourth turn, and it had gotten too hot. Our turner broke down, lost its boot. It was up at 150. We couldn't turn. We were trapped for 3 days. It went up to 160, 165, 168, 170. We were like, oh my gosh. We fixed the turner. We turned it, and I threw it under the microscope because I was panicked. And like the nematodes were still there.
Wow.
So I don't know if it's our process and it's just like maybe with our use of the mother pile and the fact that we've been doing it for so long and we're actually selecting and maybe training for these microbes, we're special. But I would venture to say that we're not special and that there's something else
Oh,
going
you're special. You are special.
on. Yeah, in some ways. But with this reality, you know, I don't think it's necessarily that the heat is what's kicking everything's butt, so to speak. I think it might be something else, like particulate size or quality of inputs, right? You just said it about this other company that, like, literally their green waste is a glyphosate rich product. Like, that's real. Like, you know, and maybe that's it. We just can't use green waste at first till we train the microbes to eat that chemical.
Been working on that.
Yes, that's a fun project. I want to hear about that.
Oh God. So before we go there, I think you figured it out. I think it's about the chunk size. I think because typically speaking, like when I made compost in New England, it was Hugel style. So I'd take an old rotten log, lay it down. Then I'd take fresh sapling branches and I'd put one leaves down, one leaves up, one leaves down, one leaves up. So I built a teepee, right?
Mhm.
Then I put my hay down, then I put my greens and browns, mix it all up, stab it, keep it, monitor the temperature, water it, obviously put some microbes in there. As soon as it got below 100, I would seed it and the seeds would just explode. Then I'd plant all the seedlings and the flowers and the ferns, and I'd walk and I never touched it. I never turned it. I never did anything to it. And, oh my God, salamanders, nematodes, you name it, just every living, creature you could possibly get. But when I got out here and I'm started to play with first here at my house doing green waste, I never had a problem because I just, basically would take the grasses and the plants and bring them up to temp to about 120. Again, no pathogen reduction because there's no synthetics here. Everything is organic. So I didn't have to worry about that stuff. I'd have great response, right? But when I got to Peach Hill and I started playing around with these post-pathogen reduction products, the chunky sizes weren't there. Like I'd go harvest chips off the sides of roads for my compost here for that chunky. But when I got up there, they didn't really have, like I just told you this, the last week I've been stealing those chips because they were there. Like I hadn't seen those at that yard before. So I really think the key very well may be is the chunkiness is allowing the gas exchange, the CO2 out, the oxygen in, so that maybe they're more heat tolerant because they're not getting collapsed on and forced into these, not no oxygen, but low oxygen environments.
Right. Well, that's right too. And if you think about like what we can see and experience with our own eyes and bodies, microclimates, right? Like, you know how it is around here. You'll be driving somewhere, it's like 110 degrees, and then you turn a corner and wow, it's okay. Now it's 85.
I know, right?
I was talking to this, gosh, Dr. Fred. I met him on our bus tour last year, and he's like basically PhD microbiologist that spent his entire life working on compost. And so, he's my senior elder in every way, and we started talking about this, and he's like, oh man, well, that's it. Like I tell him my experience, and he's like, we didn't bring up the chunk of the chips, but now that you're saying it, what he was saying was like, well, it has to be that they're getting away to a little micro niche somewhere where it can't be that it's that temperature all the way across the pile, right? So these organisms must be able to move quickly enough as they're sensing that temperature rise to get into these little pockets of, I guess, micro environment that works for them. But those chips would definitely do that, right? It would shield, it would provide,
And
basically it's like a little bunker,
right,
right?
and especially because they're moist, you soak the
Mhm,
shit out of them before you
mhm.
put them in. So
Yeah.
you're creating that like micro little fog, those misters that
How do you
fog.
prove how do we prove that with science? Whew, that'd be fun. We need some micro cameras and sensing equipment.
Well, there's actually some microscopes. They're a couple $1,000,000, but
Oh yeah.
they can do in situ microscopy over a period of time, and the biofilms don't clog the lens.
Oh wow.
It's the coolest shit ever. The lens is a glass marble that rolls on
Oh,
itself. So it's constantly cleaning itself. So you
wow.
don't lose your position on that site but the lens itself is constantly cleaning itself.
Cool.
It's so fucking
Didn't know
cool.
about that.
Yeah. So there's a number of different really cool videos coming out of watching mycorrhizae fungi moving nutrients, bacteria on the inside as well on the outside.
I saw some of
Showing,
those videos.
yeah,
Yeah, I saw some of those videos. It was incredible.
that's how they
And
do
that's
it.
what that is. I've seen those images, but I didn't know how
Yeah,
they were doing it. Wow.
yeah. So I laughingly say I'd love to win the lottery and buy one. But I don't buy lottery tickets, so chance of that happening is
To
probably
play
not
to
too.
get paid.
Um, so yeah, I think the moisture, microclimates, and the chunkiness and gas exchange is what's giving them that shelter.
Yeah.
That you're not having the loss of organisms that I have in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then also, how long is it from the time that you're mixing yours until like it's ready to sell? I guess how
So
long?
I do ingredient piles. So the first 6 months I was there, I played with all the different ingredients, right? Because you saw the place. I have
I
so many.
did. You've got a lot going on.
Well, it's like I'm in a candy shop, man. It's just like I call it my bakery because I got salt, I got sugar, I got flour, I got butter, whatever I need. I can make anything. So I usually make 4 or 5 different ingredient piles. And once I get the ingredient pile to stable 110 or less, then I'll build a windrow. But I mix them all together. Got diversity, 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 right? So the ingredient piles usually take me, sometimes I'll nail it on the first go around, especially if I'm heavy brown, and I can have it ready as little as a month. Other times when I'm starting to play with these a little bit more exotic materials, like the ones I'm doing now with a lot of these different cocoa cubes and SMS. Those usually take me 3 or 4 months to get them calmed down enough that I can actually, blend them into a windrow.
Interesting.
Because I don't want to take all that effort to build all these things out and then have it go, thermophilic to the
Right.
point that I'm constantly turning it.
Right.
And plus, I use fish brew, so that's that other inoculant. It has the diatoms. I told you about it. So
I
once
got some of it. I used your fish poo. I like it. It
right,
does have diatoms. I looked at it under the microscope. I was like, lots of diatoms in there for sure.
those diatoms are little oxygen pumps.
Hmm.
So they have 2 ways to convert energy: minerals in situ in place, or sunlight, because they have the little solar panel on them.
They
So
do.
either way, their byproduct is oxygen. And even more cool is when they die, that silica is bioavailable silica. It's not like the silica that we have to wait for it to break down to become bioavailable.
Yeah. Silicon
So
is
it's a really,
really something.
that, that product is just gold.
Yeah. I use
Gold.
it in I have a bunch of I like obsessively make these little habitats of water plants. And I usually have fish in my water plants, but I travel too much now, so I had to give my fish away, and my plants were all looking sad, and I was like, "I know it's missing." I have that little bottle you gave me. I've just been everybody looks great. They love the fish poo. It's very helpful, actually.
We actually have a professional name for it. I used to call it fish manure, but I'd explain it like, hey, when a fish excretes, it goes poof into the water column. There's no turd, there's no solid, right? It's organic matter floating in the water column. And but what in reality has now kind of been coined is mullen, fish mold,
Mm,
MULN, as a descriptive term for what it actually is, because it's algae, it's organic matter, it's unused fish food. So it's a combination of all these things that create this perfect environment, like compost, for those organisms to just go ballistic on.
mhm.
So and the bonus with that company is that yeah, you got freshwater diatoms. Nobody has that. And I've looked at fish foop is one, fish shit is another, and both of them, they smell nasty, and you put them under the microscope, and you don't really see living protozoa. I mean, you'll see cysts, but who's to say if those cysts are ciliates or if they're flagellates or amoebas? Well, amoebas we know are double walled, but you can't tell the difference between the flagellates and the ciliate cysts. So it's kind of like roll the dice to see what you get.
Yeah.
But with Keith's, fish brew, off the charts every time. There's just flagellates, there's amoeba. Sometimes you see nematodes and just tons and tons of the diatoms. But
Awesome.
interestingly enough, I'm glad that you gave it to your water plants. And if
Yeah.
you need more, let me know. I always have material on hand. More than happy to send you out a care
Yeah, I'm using little drops. Just drops are working. Just little drop, drop, drop.
pack. Love
I'll
it.
let you know when I'm ready.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So back to glyphosate. Something that I don't think the majority of people know is that in Roundup, glyphosate is the safest of all the compounds.
Mm.
Yeah, that's why they picked to test that one, because the other ones are way worse.
Like
So
that's in the makeup of the one
of the
product.
product, yeah, of the product, it's several compounds put together to make up Roundup, but they classify glyphosate as the main what is it called, active ingredient, because if they claimed the other ones, they'd have been sued into submission years ago. So that being said, we are in the process. We've done a preliminary test on whether we can clean up glyphosate in situ, so in place. And the preliminary results were positive, but it was done with the Mexican standard, not the American standard. So we can't make those claims yet, but we're going to repeat that experiment. On a sidebar, I've demonstrated with another colleague of mine using white rot fungi or saprophytes in combination with my product, which is worm castings, my biointensive compost, and fish brew, all mixed together. And then I dewater it, make a solid, and then sieve it so it's fluffy powder, so it allows the gas exchange. Ship that off, and we were able to eliminate atrazine.
Interesting.
So the white rot fungi broke the atrazine into two secondary metabolites. Unfortunately, those secondary metabolites are just as toxic as the primary, but they have a less of a half-life. So you're taking a step in the right direction. But when you introduce my product into the mix, it eliminated it. And the reason why is something that none of us talk about, and that's degraders. We talk about we talk about God, I'm brain dead.
Decomposers.
Solubilizers and decomposers, but we don't talk about degraders. So degrading bacteria, what they do is they, in a carbon chain, somewhere in the middle, you have a phosphorus, right, or phosphate. Decomposers can't get to that. Solubilizers can't solubilize it, but degraders can get in there and snap that thing off, and now you have two different carbon chains. And as they expose more and more, now you have a carbon chain with a calcium bond or a phosphorus bond, like the same one, but now it's exposed on one side. Now the solubilizer can grab it, and then now you've just got a little carbon chunk, and now the decomposers can hit the carbon wheel or the carbon circle. And so that's where this disconnect happens in bioremediation. It's like, well, what's remediating? Well, it's the whole community, but it starts with the degraders, because if they don't do their job, nobody else can do their job. And so that's the key to this whole thing. Now, taking it to the next level, the Munter Group, ESS, Ecosphere Sciences, we did an experiment with Ryder, one of the largest berry producers here in our turf, and they use some of the most horrific pesticides on the planet. And typically, they have to pay, I think it's over $1.3 million a year to get rid of their what they call canes or rootstocks, because they're so concentrated with these horrific pesticides. And so they're required to send out when they do a clean out or a replant, they're required to take all of that biomass or portion of it and send it out to have it tested, so that the person accepting this waste has a clear record of what was in it and how bad it really was. And that's basically how they set the dollar value, although they just take it and bury it. Anyway, so they had to do a post test because we ran berries. I don't know if you understand what the problem they have right now is, because they're basically their standard operating procedures are any berry that is rotten or has obvious disease or defect, they pick it and throw it over their shoulder. So they're just spreading the disease over and over and over again, all throughout their friggin' facilities. And so they hired ESS to come in and see if they could take that berry material and these canes and create or get rid of it, detoxify it, so that they weren't just re-inoculating with diseases their entire facilities. And we convinced them not only will we be able to do that, but you'll actually have a plant-specific biological fertilizer for those plants, which means you will no longer need any of these pesticides. And they were like, whoa, no, that's not true. And I said, all right, let's do it. Let's run it. I want you to take the byproduct, the output as we call it, do your complete panel. They did a 270 panel legacy, as well as all of the known pesticides that were on it. And it came back non-detect across the board.
Nice. Good
right?
work.
So between understanding glyphosate breakdown, atrazine breakdown, and legacy, as well as commonly used horrific pesticides, there's no reason, again, this is, theory, this is hypothesis. I have some hard testing, but we're going to be doing a bunch more in the next 6 months to really verify this. Another thing that we're doing is, the compound they used to kill termites out here?
I'm always
Right?
like, I know I haven't even been introduced to it because I'm such a termite fan, but I know.
It's a phosphate. It's not quite a PFAS, but it's bad. So we're going to be doing some testing on applying muncher juice to that. Once the tenting is done, come by, take a sample, send it to the lab, treat it, take that sample, send it to the lab. So we'll have some information on that. And then the craziest thing, Keisha, like, you want to talk about a guy just like so excited, me just out of control, just launched like a rocket ship. Started talking with a dude that does tech transfer. So tech transfer is when you have two parties, somebody has a technological, a software program or something, and you want to use it. You have to have a license agreement. You have to, all this legal paperwork that you're not going to reverse engineer it. You're not going to give it away. You're not going to sell it. Like it's hardcore, right? This isn't an NDA. This is like, you're going to jail if you break this agreement, right? So he's in charge of all of the tech transfer for Los Alamos National Lab.
Oh.
He just retired. I get to play with him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're gonna get access to everything.
And a backdoor entrance, because he knows all of the labs, he knows all of the scientists, he knows the groups, the individuals, and how best to pair us with what we want to learn. And he goes, well, what would your one question be if I gave you one? I said, do we kill out PFAS? Do we decompose PFAS? Because that is a fucking huge issue right now. It's like, in my mind, it's worse than microplastics. We're going to get through microplastics. Our bodies are going to deal with them. The great garbage patch out in the middle of the ocean, there's all kinds of decomposing plastic bacteria on that already. So nature always finds a way. But PFAS is a whole different game. That one, they don't call it the forever chemical for no reason.
Yeah.
So if we can use biology to break down that, all right, now we got something, right? We can really start to make an impact on a very, very large scale for everybody, all humans, to start dealing with these horribly toxic sites. And one of the things that I consider the greatest loss of my life was I met a gentleman back in 1990s. I was looking to buy a paint factory to convert it into a workshop for myself. Horribly toxic, all kinds of issues. I started working with this gentleman named John Todd, who had created a series of, I think it was 15 ponds and lagoons, and introduced different biology in animals and plants to create a flow through system that would eliminate some of these toxic chemicals. And I told him what I was trying to do, and he's like, "Oh, okay, that's a little over my head, but talk to this guy." So I reached out to this guy. He had traveled the world and collected root balls and biology from all of the most toxic sites he could find in the world. And he created a library. And his goal was to take that library and take those organisms and grow them out in scale, so that people could use that to clean up these sites. And unfortunately, he kind of mysteriously died, and I lost touch with him, obviously. And his kids didn't want anything to do with this. They probably got threatened. Who knows? And so that whole library got destroyed. And that was like so close to having the tools to do exactly what I'm talking about, and that is, military sites, giant friggin' corporations who they should all be friggin' sentenced to death for abandoning these sites. Like, how are they getting away with this? They just leave these giant toxic fucking sites and walk away scot free, and it just burns me to the friggin' soul. And so that's one of the reasons why I get so motivated when we have the opportunity to unleash or unlock some of these degraders that will start to move that needle in a positive way, and stop letting it seep into our groundwater, into our wildlife and everything else that all comes back to bite us in the ass one way or another. So that's my little story on dealing with some of the more nasty sides of humanity. And believe me, I want to help the farmers as much as I possibly can, but I also want to start dealing with some of those more scary places that we have abandoned on our planet.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Salinas, my goodness, a lot of our clients in Salinas, like the groundwater they've used, it's a sandy soil. Almost all the soil in Salinas is sandy, and they've used so many different fertilizers that when we take the water from the wells and we test it, it literally is a fertilizer. And so if you haven't done the testing and you're a farmer, you don't know that you're continually stacking more and more and more chemicals on the problem. But it's like, I mean, if you look at it, farms are becoming those toxic places, Leighton, and that's what's scary to me is like, you're talking about these worst places in the world to fix, and I believe that a lot of that is spilling over to where our food is actually grown. It's like, I also believe that like the answer to both of those problems is a biodiverse microbial product that's made.
It's all about the biology.
I'm sorry to be like, just put microbes on it, that'll fix it. Like it's simplistic, but
You're right.
seriously,
You're
well,
right.
and it isn't. It's like you're saying, like for us to actually get all of the large scale facilities across the board to start thinking about PFAS and start like degrading them and using a specific product, like again, like we're looking at just a bureaucratic nightmare. The only way that we could do it is to come in and actually change the laws. Like the rule has to state that the big guys have to do this, right? And like no one's going to sentence them to death. They're going to continue doing what they're doing, and they're going to just pay carbon credits or whatever. They don't care. But it does take us figuring out an actionable way for them to do something. Obviously, all the large companies they're into making their image look better, right? So they're so big on carbon credits. If we had an actual answer that we could actually get the funding to prove multiple times over, we could really make a change. Because you're right, there's a lot of people doing this work. You're not the only one. I mean, we work with people that are all these local fungi, like here in California, that grow different oyster mushroom strains. Like they eat basically everything that's toxic, and it's just like a matter of proving that this works, proving what it works with, and then figuring out how to scale it out and get other people to use it. We got a lot of barriers in our way, though. We need more movers and shakers out there actually doing it, I feel like.
Hey, that's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing.
Whether we're leaving a big footprint or a small footprint, we're making a mark. We're creating a trail, a path for others to follow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting up there in my years. You know, I abused myself very much when I was younger, and I feel the pain now. So I try to do things like this, which is like educate on a level where, you know, it inspires people. Try to keep it intuitive, simple, and easy to understand. But this conversation we just had today was beautiful because basically you're stating the obvious, that all we really need to do is find this diverse biology. The delivery system is the compost, whether you liquefy it or use it in a solid form. That's how you inoculate soil, and sooner or later, you know, the light bulb's going to go off in the younger generation of farmers, or the older farmers or the mid-level farmers are going to get up against a point where they can't afford to farm anymore, and they don't have a choice but to move or shift in a direction that by default cleans it up, right? This is by default. They have no choice. They're running out of money. Let's try this. And guess what? You not only did you grow your crops and you grew them more healthy, and you helped the soil be more healthy, and you actually have a better nutrient profile in your crop, and by default you cleaned up, you know, the soil's ability to clean the water and flush out all the chemicals. So
you sound like a snake oil salesman, Leighton, but
hey, whatever it fucking takes. All right, whatever it fucking
clean
takes.
your water. It's gonna help you digest food. It's gonna make you happier. Nutrient efficiency. Weeds.
Here, have some of my Kool-Aid and some of my pipe, right?
Yeah, right. It's Kool-Aid. It's delicious. Fixes everything. I know we sound like crazy people, but it's true.
That's the scary part, Keisha. It is fucking true. And that, you know, when I don't know, maybe 3-4 months into working with Elaine down at Rodale, I couldn't sleep for like weeks because I was like, oh my God, what's my market? What isn't my market? Everything is my market, right? Like everybody needs this. And so it was like, yeah, I became that lunatic screaming in the desert, friggin', what was it, John the Baptist? Oh, you gotta baptize, and you know, scared away so many people, so many friends were just like, oh my God, he's lost it. He's finally fucking lost it. And you know, and I was like, you know, whatever. Yeah, maybe I have lost it, but I've been shown something that is undeniable. And yeah, it does actually really work. And it's amazing how quickly it works. You know, that's the other side of the coin. You've seen it. You've seen plant reaction in like days or even 1 month. I mean, I had redwood trees fucking green out from the inside out in 30 days. I was like, oh my God, it even horrifies me sometimes that how well it works. So yeah, I guess you have to be.
Horrify is a good word. You try to find another explanation. You're like, was it the weather? Was it the rain? What was it can't be that.
Right? Oh
Yeah.
man. So we did a presentation recently for Ecosphere Science, a high-level presentation. And remember we were talking earlier about POEM and MOEM and GOM, right? Ground up organic matter, mineral associated organic matter, and particulate organic matter. Well, there's 2 more organic matters that really have never been discussed. One is pyro something. So it's basically after a wildfire. Now, I don't want to use the term wildfire because wildfires are way more intense than like a burn, like the Indigenous used to do, where they just burned off the little bit. That didn't kill the trees, right? They might have charred the bark a little bit, but everything was fine. All they did was break down that organic matter or duff into biochar, right? That's essentially what it was.
Right.
So that's another form of organic matter that's really starting to become talked about. And the last but most important one is called DOM, dissolved organic matter. And what dissolved organic matter is 1 to 2% of a healthy soil system. It's a tiny little fraction, right? It's exudate. Plant exudates are DOM. Guess what you make when you liquefy it? So now the plant doesn't have to do shit. because you fed the soil all the exudates. You did all the work for them. And so now that plant can, instead of using its ATP to leak exudates at 40 to 80% of its total capacity, it can use that 40 to 80% for fruit set, for growing thicker, stronger cells, or more vegetative growth, or more healthy growth. So basically, you and I, and anybody that makes an extract, is creating DOM, a plant exudate, in situ, in place. Is that not fucking cool?
Yeah, so how do we prove that the compost and what is exuded by the plants are the same compounds?
So there's this company called Woods End in Maine.
What's in?
You ever heard of them? They're crazy. You talk about an expensive compost test. I think it's like $800 or $900 per test. You have to send it to them in a sealed cooler with dry ice. I mean, they take this shit seriously. They're the ones that came up with the understanding that exudates are carbon. It's just another carbon source, which is what we're talking about, right? Compost is carbon. It's just a complex carbon, and it's food for the biology. It's food for the system. It builds structure, holds water, blah 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 blah. I'm preaching to the choir now, but they're the ones that can verify that exudates are carbon, because that's what they do. They tested it. And then there's this woman, Cartufa, out of Colorado. I'll get you the paper when we're off. And she spent, the first paper came out, I think, in 2021. And her most recent paper in 24, like just this year, really goes down the rabbit hole of explaining this to you.
Okay.
Or to the
Yeah,
reader.
I'm interested in reading that. Yeah, because I mean, my assumption has always been, not that I study exudates in any sort of depth besides just like kind of knowing that they exist, right?
Yep, yep.
Was that they, that different plants are exuding different compounds, and that the different compounds are, all over the place, basically, and that they can kind of tailor them in different ways, and perhaps they change based on the season and all these other. And so, yeah, I'm curious, like, what the how that compares to compost, or like compost made in different places, or yeah, I'm excited to read more deeply into it. That sounds really.
Yeah. So if you've ever seen the metabolic pathway of anything, a single cell organism, a human, whatever, we're all basically made of cells. The metabolic pathway, if you were going to read it, would be like a mural on the wall. It's so fucking complex that you're dealing with these little things that change this, that change that, change this, change this. So it's like trying to understand that the universe is expanding, and expanding into what, right? It's just, it's hard for the human brain to comprehend. But you're absolutely right, because we do know for a fact that the plants do leak different exudates at different times of the year. And they leak different exudates to grow out different bacteria, to mine certain nutrients that they want, or in conjunction feed a whole community because they like this community, that community's doing something in return. So that rabbit hole is like looking at metabolites or metabolites.
I liked how simple and direct you were, but I was like, hold on. Hold on. I think I have to put out a warning.
I should have a warning label on my phone.
Way over my head. Love it, though. I love it.
Yeah. So typically at this point in time, we're an hour and a half in, and we have 5 questions. So I'd like to go ahead and switch over to the questions, but I would love to beg you to come back on in the near future so we can finish this conversation, because I think we've kind of only started.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll have to get Casey out here sometime too. He loves getting fired up with you guys.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
Cool.
That'd be awesome.
Cool. Good.
Okay, so we'll start with our first question here. What enzymes or should be present in quality compost?
You got to take that one, Leighton. I don't look at enzymes. I look at microbes. I got no enzyme test.
All right. So not all proteins can be enzymes, but all enzymes can be proteins. So what are proteins? Proteins are the most valuable source of food at a metabolic level. So the cells need them to create different interactions within the cell so that it can, if it finds itself with the soil drying out, it can strengthen its outer shell. If it finds it's come in contact with a mineral that it wants to harvest, it can use those proteins, fold those proteins to make a stronger or different enzyme that it can use to dissolve it, to bring it back into its body. So enzymes and proteins are critical for all cellular life, but they don't necessarily tie back into compost. But again, if you're providing the most diverse inputs, you're obviously providing the potential or the necessary ingredients for those proteins and enzymes to be formed and then used and utilized.
Right. I mean, my immediate thought is that, yeah, it's like these, like when we're looking at it's hard to say like what enzymes would even be present, because you'd have to know each and every organism and exactly what it's doing, what it's up to. But the more diversity that we have present, the more enzymatic processes are going to be in the mix, and we're going to be able to eat more and more things. It was like Leighton was talking about with the with the compost that could just eat any sort of chemical or any sort of
Degraders.
Yeah, the degraders, right? It's like, wow, like what kind of enzymes are they having
in their
comparison?
body.
Exactly. Yeah. And then how infinite is that? We have no idea like who those organisms even are, or how many there are. Like, this is like, it's a good question.
Keisha, that's the beauty of DNA. We're gonna know it. So Craig is busy like validating primers so that we can overlay the soil food web with DNA. We should have that ready this summer or early fall. We should be able to roll that out. Think about how valuable that tool would be, right? Mm-hmm. So that piece, and then the other piece is what's called the pipeline. So the pipeline is where you have validated the data. All the ones and zeros are correct. There's no skews. Everything. The more you test it, it comes out the same every time. Then you can feed that into what's called a pipeline, and the pipeline will then take those ones and zeros and match it against all of the different bacteria, fungi, predator, nematodes, and flagellates and amoeba. And basically give you an answer as to what their functioning is. And again, it's not species specific because of horizontal gene transfer and some of the stuff Dr. James White's doing. We don't even want to look at individual species. They're changing so fast that it would make no sense. There are different bacteria 2 generations out, right? So we're looking at families. But we know that these families function this way. Hey, the family of phosphate solubilizers are solubilizing phosphate into a plant available form. So by running the information or gaining the information, validating the information, then running it through this pipeline of all of the white papers that were ever created in these super libraries, you're going to be able to start saying, okay, this particular compost is going to be best used in this manner for these groups of plants because it was made of, or it was made up of these different types of bacteria and or advanced organisms. So that's
I'm so bummed that like AI gets access to every white paper ever made before I get access to like 20 of them. It's so expensive. I want access to this massive library of data. And
don't worry, it's coming. We're gonna have it.
I'm excited to hear more about that too. You gotta send me all your links after this.
Oh, trust me, you'll get the master link when we are ready. We're doing this open source. Good. We're trying to get more and more people that are understanding and passionate about this so that you can be better equipped to help your clients, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the client. Like, I'm not in for this for the money and for fame and fortune. I just want to fix shit before I leave. I want to make sure it's better than when I got here. And that's my motivation for all of this. And if I can help people like you and Rob at Peach Hill and everybody else, then that feeds my soul and my spirit. That's what it's all about in my life. It's all about me, making myself feel better.
About me feeling good about what I did. Whatever the reason, keep doing it.
There you go. All right, long-winded answer.
Yep. Okay, Serena wants to know what kind of cleanup and soil treatments are needed to clean up radioactive waste spills.
Oh boy.
What's cool about radioactive waste spills and like biology in general is, from what I've heard, anytime we've had these massive disasters and it's been left to just be natural for any amount of time, those organisms that degrade it just kind of like are present. They're finding all these different microbes. It was at Chernobyl that they went back into and just found all of these different degraders that were, eating up all that had leaked out.
So you'd have to understand that radioactive material has a half-life. So what we believe is happening is that the specific bacteria are helping to degrade or move that needle toward a less lengthy half-life. But we know for sure, based on Elaine's work, that if the fungi specifically, mycorrhizae, will pull an isotope out of the soil and bring it back to the plant, and the plant goes, no, 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 I don't want that shit. Get it out of here. So the mycorrhizae brings it back and then puts a special pipeline out and just starts filling it with those isotopes.
Mhm.
And it wasn't, everything was going great. I mean, the wildlife has come back. Yeah, some of the dogs have genetically modified, or some of the wolves or the stray dogs of whatever you want to call them, coy dogs or whatever's happening. The wildlife has come back. Yes, there has been some modification to the individual animals, but everything was really, really good until fucking Russia invaded it with Ukraine. They drove all their tanks through there. They ripped the forest up. They set up their defensive positions and tripped every nuclear sensor in the facility. And then they were like, oh, fuck, we got to get out of here. But nobody realized they had friggin' released all of that radioactive isotopes that were stored in the mycorrhizae. Set the whole place back 30 years, 40 years. I mean, thank God.
Really the problem. That's the problem too, right? Is it's like if the ecosystem gets destroyed again,
Yeah,
everything gets released back in. It's not like it's disappearing. Nothing's eating it, and it's just going away.
well, remember uranium. We have uranium mines. We have uranium deposits where plutonium deposits. We have, and then we of course created some more complex ones. But bottom line is those are in nature by default. There are organisms that are living around them. There are plants growing on the surface of where those deposits are. So nature always finds a way. I mean, fuck, this planet was a radioactive waste dump when it first started. Nothing lived here. So the microbes were the key to getting this place to be a planet or the Garden of Eden. Well, maybe Spansermia, maybe there's some microbes came in on a comet. I'm sure that something had to start the flower of life, but for whatever reason, it happened. It's here, and this place was totally inhospitable 3 billion years ago, right? So nature always finds a way. That was my rant.
I liked it.
Okay, Serena, I have 2 compost bins, and each one can make up to 80 pounds of compost. How many square feet does that cover?
Keisha, you take that one.
It just depends.
That was your
I love that
extractor or the full material,
Yeah, so it depends on what you want to do with it, how much area it can cover. If you're actually if you're spreading it out across the ground, it's not going to cover very much at all. But I would say that a way to take your compost and make it go further would be to just liquefy it. We've talked about it a few times, through this past hour and a half. But basically, just taking and making a compost extract is probably your best way. Just getting your compost a few handfuls into a 5-gallon bucket of water and then spreading that around. Really, 80 pounds of compost could cover, gosh, what? Like 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 square feet. It just depends on the biological numbers that are in that compost. If you've done a really good job and you're seeing lots of protozoa, you're seeing, nice diverse fungi and nematodes, that compost can spread really far. So you could probably treat I don't know how big your land is, but you could probably treat your yard multiple times with that. 80 pounds goes a long way if it's really high quality compost.
And a good trick, if you don't have a microscope, is to walk out into an undisturbed forest, pull up a handful and smell it,
Mm.
and then take your compost out of the baggie and smell it. And if it smells the same, chances are you got what Keisha's talking about. It's a very, very healthy, biologically diverse compost.
I like the sticky test too. There's something I noticed with our compost at some point is like when I start squeezing it in these little cracks in my hand, I'll get, it'll be dark. And when I go to wash my hands, I can't just run water over it. I have to freaking scrub it. And it's not just like, oh, I'm going to wash my hands. Like I have to scrub it like there's paint on my hands or something like that. It's very, very hard to get off. And if your compost is sticky and it's not easy to wash off your hands, that's microbial action. Nothing else does that.
I call it greasy.
Yeah,
It's
greasy. It's like grease. It's like grease.
hard to
Yeah,
get
it
off.
would be like trying to wash oil off your hands. It takes two or three tries.
Great trick. I love it, Keisha. Great trick.
Okay, Serena has another one. How much worm castings are needed per square foot of garden space?
Well, again, quality would be the big issue with that. Not all vermicompost is made the same. A lot of the commercial stuff that you can buy at bag stores are basically, well, they're manufactured, right? So you're talking about large volumes of some kind of manure, maybe a little bit of food waste, but it's not made with intention. It's not made with diversity. One of the interesting things that composting and vermicompost can do is release endophytes. So releasing the organisms that live within the waste product that you're providing. At the end of the day, remember, the worms are eating the bacteria and then releasing a form of compost called MOAM, mineral associated organic matter. That's why it's so good. That's why it is considered a fertilizer in many ways, is because all of that MOAM is biologically available to be torn through by the microbes in your soil. So if you have a super rich, healthy, biologically active garden, and you put a little bit of worm castings down, you're going to see incredible plant reaction, especially if they're good worm castings. But even if they're the commercially produced non-diverse form of it, they're still going to have a plant reaction as long as you have the biology in the soil. Again, if you have or use or any kind of organic fertilizers, and I ran into this a ton in my early work with landscapers, was, oh, that shit doesn't work. That shit doesn't work. It just sits on the top of the soil. Yeah, it does, because you don't have any fucking biology in your soil. So it's not going to work. You have to have the biology to break that stuff down to make it plant available. And so it's the same thing is true with worm castings. If you don't have the healthy biological system. Now, again, if you have bacterially dominant soil, they're going to eat all that stuff up real quick, but you're not going to see a plant reaction because you don't have the protozoa to eat the bacteria to release those nutrients plant available. The bacteria don't always release directly to the plant. Sometimes they do, but on the most cases, it's the protozoa that are harvesting the bacteria, consuming them because they want the carbon. They can't eat the nitrogen. If they eat the nitrogen, the protozoa and the nematodes explode. So they're pooping out that nitrogen and all those other minerals and nutrients. But if you don't have protozoa, you're not getting nutrient cycling. You're not going to see that plant reaction.
Yeah. I mean, that's the second question about the amount to put in. And it's really the first thing to think about always is like, is there life inside of it? And it's hard to know because there's so many companies out there that will say like, this is fungal dominated, like this has all the microbes you need. It's really difficult to find people that you can actually trust that stand by their word. But if you think about like, if you actually do get the product, whether you're making it at home or buying it from someone else, like it's going to be expensive and difficult to make compost. It's at least laborious to carry the stuff out to the pile and water it every day. But if you actually think about what you're doing when you're seeding microlife in, it's not so much of a recipe of like how much per square foot. often we have to look at how much do we have access to. You can kind of tell from Leighton and I's conversation, there's not a lot of people out there in the world making really stellar compost.
Yep.
So number one, the issue is usually that there's just not enough to go around. Or if we do have a bunch of it, it costs a lot to make. So our farmers aren't buying it in the way they want to buy it. They're buying it in the way that they can buy it. So often with this resource, it's looking at what can I do, not over what do I want to do. Because I often have these situations where it's like, man, I'd love to bring in 10 yards of compost right now. I want to do extracts every week. I want to spray teas. I want to do DNA analysis. But the truth of it is the cash that's going to be made from the crop isn't going to be enough to cover all that. And so a lot of the times what we're doing is like working with what we got. And when we only have a little bit of the microbial product that we need to use, I always say use less more frequently. So when we're consulting, it's like, okay, I have 5 gallons of compost to use for my yard. All right, well, first I'm going to start off with a handful and I'm going to water that out. And then I maybe will use 2 handfuls. And as I start to see my soil and my plants respond, my soil is starting to turn brown. It's starting to get a little bit more loose and decompacted, starting to see more flower production and vibrancy. At that point, I might actually increase my compost because I'm seeing like, hey, there's an ecosystem where these microbes are going to survive. What you got to think is like the first time you throw those microbes out there, it's like throwing a person in the middle of the desert. Like, hey, good luck, bud. You got a bottle of water, like see how long you make it. Now you have a community out in the desert. They build houses, they have wells, they've planted food. Well, it's easy to live out there for a week or for the rest of your life. So if you're thinking about it in those terms, like I add more microbial friends later in the game, like once the soil really starts to change. And if you're a person that has unlimited microbes, I would say you could put with a really solid compost, even worm castings, right? If it was really microbially dense, you could get away with putting up to 50%, but that would be too much. If you were going solid, you could probably put a handful per foot, and that would still be overdoing it, right, Leighton? I mean, you really don't need that much when you're talking about such a condensed, microbe focused material.
What a great advice. When you start to see the soil darken, when you start to be able to just poke your finger down in and you're starting to build tilth, that's when you apply it because, like you said, the community has been established. Now other people can come and join that community and make it more diverse and make it bigger and survive. So great advice. Absolutely great advice,
Yeah.
Keisha.
Definitely. Okay, Perpetual wanted to know any types of composting, any tips on composting fresh grass clippings. They go hot, black, gray, slimy, even in the past when it's added paper snippets.
Yeah, I got you on that one. Grass has to be composted like almost immediately. Within 2 hours in a pile, it's going to start heating up. Within 6 hours, it's going to start getting anaerobic smells. Within 24 hours, you're going to see it go totally brown. Then the black slimy stuff happens. Green for our recipe, the way that I do it, 60% of the pile is going to be woody material, chunky woody material, like we talked about earlier. And those greens are going to be about 30%. And we don't ever want our very finely chopped grass to be all of that 30%. So you need to adjust the rest of your ratios to fit your grass issue. So if you're bringing in a yard of finely clipped grass, then that means you're going to have quite a few more yards of like 9 yards or whatever of woody material. But you're also going to want to maybe go to your yard and like weed your garden, pull some leaves off a tree, maybe cut some grass with a sickle bar mower, or with a just a scythe, so that you have more chunk. Your issue with that green material is it's just really, really chopped finely, and so the bacteria is crazy. Yeah.
Agreed. 100%. 100%. Yeah. When my grass gets cut, I immediately mix it with other plant materials.
Yeah.
And plus, I love the smell of it. Like when he cuts the grass, man, I'm out there mixing my grass. Sorry.
If only they made the car air fresheners to smell like grass.
Is there such a thing?
Bacon. I want bacon, okay?
All right, kid, I love that too. The transition from bacon cooking to the morning to the fresh cut lawn, like that's the good life.
Yeah. There you go. There you go.
Okay, so Serena's going back into the nuclear waste. What kind of soil treatments are needed to reverse the effects of nuclear waste leaking into the soil?
So mycorrhizae would be the instant answer, and Well, if it, first of all, you're probably not smart to be there. Like, you don't want to go out there and apply compost extract. Like, maybe take a drone and fly over and drop some mycorrhizae spores until you get a radioactive level that's acceptable to like getting a few X-rays, and then maybe you can go further. But generally speaking, nuclear reactors or radiation releases are not done on small scale. So you're talking with a disaster, something that you can't take lightly and would have to be done responsibly over a series of years to cut the half-life down. But again, it's just the half-life that you're reducing, or you're tying it up in the mycorrhizae, which means you can't disturb the soil.
And then you look at what Japan did after what happened there. They're using biology to clean that up, and they're being successful with that.
To some degree, yes.
Yeah. Okay, random question. I presume it's okay to give vegetable stock to plants. Are the nutrients plant available, or does it need to be processed by the microbes? Would it be more suitable for grow or bloom cycle?
Well, it's always best to feed the plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the ultimate plant food. That plant spent all of its energy pulling all of that stuff up out of the ground to be what it is. So if you take the leftovers of that plant and compost them, or you could juice them, whatever you want to do, chop them fine, and then put them right back into the soil matrix. Sure, that's going to be the fastest, best way to give that plant exactly what that plant wants. So it's up to you as to how you process it. Keisha, you got something to add on that one?
No, not really. I mean, permaculture background, chop and drop all the way.
I love it.
I mean, I've seen. We had one client. I guess I will add that he didn't have a background in microbiology. He wasn't trying to specifically add microbes to his soil, but had looked at permaculture as a strawberry farmer. And what he did was like he planted as much diverse plants as possible. So he would get like these cover crop blends. He'd go buy like all of them. So he'd go to the store and just get like every mix he could, and then seed them out across hundreds of acres. And as soon as that plant would bloom or would grow and get to a good, nice size, he'd till it back in. And then he would plant a different set of plants. And he did that for 3 entire growing seasons before he planted his strawberries. And when we came to work with him, now he works with our compost, but before there were nematodes, there was tested amoeba, he had nice fungi, and the soil there was actually soil. When you're in Salinas and you look around, everything's white. It's not really soil, it's more sand. His property, you could literally see where his lines were on the fence. Just on the other side of it was dark brown. And so, I mean, yeah, you're right. We're mimicking nature here. We don't have to do something crazy beyond just cutting the plants, putting it back in place, and letting the microbes eat it, right? That's how soil's formed. That's the basis of everything we do. So, yeah, agreed.
Love it.
It's literally all about the biology, and the finer the particles in it. Composting is basically like fermenting your food. It's already allowing the biology to break it down, makes it more bioavailable for us. That's what we're doing for our soils. So the smaller the particle size until you get to the dissolved in water, that's the best because that's more instantly available to the biology that's building the cells in your plant.
Yeah. Agreed. But remember one thing, like Keisha said, don't use a ton of DOM if it's just going to wash off your soil.
Yes.
Like, you got to get your soil ready to absorb it. But once your soil's ready to absorb it, oh my God, the plant reaction.
Well, you can think of it as a sponge, right? And these tiny particulates, I mean, it's very easy for us to think about that. It's like, just think of like coffee grounds on a sponge. They just think they're going to go right into those little niches, right? But if you put it on your counter and sprayed it with water, it would just wash away. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, too, just remembering that like when we're growing microbes, that it's not always about getting the smallest particles possible, but creating an environment where those small particles can live and be sustained there with oxygen. But yeah, absolutely, Ken, I agree.
Love it.
And we've got one last question here. Do nematodes maintain a healthy population once you've applied a copious amount to the soil, or do you need to reapply after some months?
Yeah, again, it depends on how healthy the soil is when you get the nematodes in place. Nematodes they're wild creatures. There are nematodes that are grown in labs, but they're also from the wild. Like all the nematodes we work with are wild creatures. They're like wolves in the soil, and they're able to move fairly quickly. So there are things that'll kill nematodes. Nematicides are one huge one. So it's like, you go put nematodes out, say, like we were just talking about, you've got your healthy soil sponge. You've put your nematodes out. They've crawled down in there. They're living with the roots. They're feeding on exudates. They're happy creatures. And then you come in because you have a root feeding nematode problem, and you say, oh, my answer here is to just kill this all with a nematicide. Then yeah, you're going to have to reapply. Also, extreme tilling can kill them all. Light tilling, they can live. It really depends on how you treat the soil, and what kind of environment you're putting them into. So I've literally in my front yard, like I applied nematodes really lightly the first 2 or 3 years I lived there, and now I don't apply them anymore. But if I need, I take photos of microbes for fun and also as a job, and so sometimes I'll need a lot of nematodes in one place to photograph them, and I know I can just go out in my yard, I can grab a scoop, I can extract them, and they're there. So yes, they can live for a very long time. But I've done nothing in the past 3 years that's going to mess with them or give them a reason to be exterminated.
And one other caveat is that if you are buying lab grown, they're less likely to survive long term. They can breed, which is okay. That means that their next generation will be a little bit more tolerant, a little bit stronger, et cetera, et cetera. If you can keep them alive long enough for them to have a generational expansion so that they're used to living in your environment, then you're okay. But primarily think of any lab grown organism, anything that's grown in vitro as a spoiled rich kid that got ripped out of his mansion and thrown in the ghetto. How long will he survive? Now, the reverse is true. You take the ghetto kid and you throw him in the mansion with all these resources. How well is that kid going to do? So this is why we like using nematodes that come from compost, not store-bought. I mean, not that you can't do it. It's just you have to be more diligent in understanding that they're probably not going to have nearly the survival rate as the ones that come from nature.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time looking at our nematodes through nematode extracts and tracking them through the years, of course. And
yeah, but you're doing extracts, right?
Oh, yeah. Nematode extracts all the time, like all the time. That's like my big. I enjoy using that method because you can really see what's going on in the whole handful of soil, which is just better than one drop. But I have a particular interest in nematodes. And the first year and a half in our compost business, we never saw fungal feeders. After a year and a half, we started seeing them regularly. After 3 years, we started seeing predatory nematodes regularly. And now I see diverse predatory nematodes regularly. And I have tried to put the lab growns in. And with nematodes, like you can recognize them under the microscope. And, we see so many different shapes and sizes that are not necessarily those nematodes that we bought in the packages that we inoculated with. So in the future, really looking forward to working with some nematologists to just really round out more of that knowledge. I think a lot of people now are looking at, because we can do these extracts of soil, looking at what is the diversity of nematodes present in soil as a key to, how healthy is this? How functioning of an environment is this? So there's something to look at as time goes on.
Yeah, I like to refer them as the T-Rex.
Yeah.
The only way that T-Rex is going to survive is if you have an entire ecology to support that advanced super predator. Yeah. So without the ecology, that guy ain't going to be there.
The predator prey.
Yeah.
Yep, predator prey.
Yep. Now, I know we're at the 2 hours, guys, but I do have one question I would like to ask, and Lily kind of hinted at it here. With biochar provides the condominium to house the microbes. Do you use, or what's your thoughts on biochar?
Oh goodness, here we go. I have lots of thoughts on biochar. Firstly, being that just like compost or any like food, anything on this planet, biochar is not just biochar. Not all biochar is created equally. Not all biochar is equally useful, right? I don't necessarily. I've played with it a lot. You can imagine, because the word bio is attached to it. Like, everyone calls me about biochar trials. I've seen biochar that's being produced by these huge factories that are doing the energy production, that it literally killed the microbes in the compost, and didn't work well in the soil at the same time. I have seen biochar that has been treated in a certain way, charged in a certain way, that is awesome with my houseplants. I believe that biochar, just like activated charcoal, is used for if your dog gets poisoned, if you gets poisoned, if you have, you've eaten something that doesn't deal with you, it can bind up toxins. So I think on one side, biochar is like one of our most valuable tools in restoration, regeneration with compost. On the other side, I don't like to just say like, you did. Yeah, you did. You opened a big can of worms.
Show on that.
People will say this, like, there's got to be a lot of money behind biochar, because I just see all of this information out about it, that it's this house for microbes. I can see biochar underneath a microscope. And I can tell you what, when you look at soil where you're getting aggregation of organic materials, you will see fungi growing through it, housing itself inside of it. You'll see nematodes, you'll see flagellates. I know what a microbe house looks like, and it is an aggregate in soil on a micro level. You'll see this aggregate get connected by fungi to another aggregate, right? They'll start binding and pulling. You see them actively eating. I spend a lot of time looking at biochar, and that's not what I see when I look at biochar. I see a lot of space. I see nematodes, I see fungi, I see protozoa, but they all seem separate. They're not bound together. What I believe that you need to have to make biochar a true house for microorganisms is also organic material that is like a less charred, that has more accessible nutrient to it. I believe biochar mixed with good compost, biochar mixed in soil. I think there's a lot of things that you can use it for, but to just say like biochar is a house for microbes, no. Biochar is usually dry. It comes in a bag. It's kind of inert. There's nothing in it. It's not just because it's called biochar doesn't mean there's bio there. But I'm not against it. I know how that sounds, and I know how I go off. Biochar is like a trigger word for me, but I will say we use it, and I think when it's made thoughtfully out of materials that are from nature, and there's no weird building materials and residues from glues, and you should just see what comes through the pipeline to those places that create energy. It's gnarly. So please think about where you're getting your biochar from, and I'm sure in the future we could dive into this more. I just went off at the end of the podcast. Can of worms open, blah, and nobody else is there. I know, I'm sorry.
No, that's beautifully well put, because again, if it's done appropriately, then it does have those pore spaces. And
Absolutely.
I think Michael was spot on. If you take biochar as it is and throw it in soil, all the microbes are going to disassociate with the plants and go hang out in the biochar. It's perfect. But if it's charged biochar, so it has been inoculated either through vermicompost or compost, then yeah, it is effective in a small percentage in soil. I'm like you, Keisha. I mean, I'm in both camps at the same time, and it drives me nuts, because I'm like, well, again, if we knew the source, then yeah, I will recommend it. But if I don't know the source, I can't recommend it. I don't know if it's going to fuck you or hurt, or, excuse my language, hurt you or help you. Right. And that's when you're dealing with farmers and clients that are risking their livelihood on the guarantee that these plants and the weather and everything are going to work. It's too risky. It's too risky of a thing to recommend or agree that they should do it without having all of the information.
Right. I do like it for the idea for like cleaning water, right? Putting it into some sort of containment that water can flow through, because it does bind up chemicals. Like that's what it does, right? And I can just see them in these mesh, the biochar inside the mesh, the water flowing easily through it, and then that stuff getting pulled out and taken to an appropriate place to be remediated. I think it could be awesome when we're talking about mitigation of farmer runoff into rivers and places like that, especially if you mix it with compost, right? It's even more powerful than
100% agreed.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
wow.
guys.
That was a good one. Keisha, thank you so much.
Yeah,
you
thanks
so
for
much
having me.
for giving us 2 hours and almost 10 minutes of your time today. I know you're busy, and I
Flew
just
by.
really appreciate you as a human being, you and Casey, and all the work that you're doing.
Oh,
Ken, as always, thank you for all the work behind the scenes that you do putting this together and putting it on. And I believe it'll be available for you to send out to your friends if they want to watch it. This is taped, and it
great.
usually
Yeah.
takes a couple days or a few days or a week to get it up, but it will be up soon.
Yeah, I'll throw it up
Well,
on the Instagram link tree. And then
for YouTube, it's here right now. You can send them to it's all about the biology. They can watch it right away. Takes me generally a day to get it up onto the podcast software where it's in audio only.
okay, cool. Kim, thank you. You do a
You will
lot of
stick
back.
around. You stick around, young lady. I'm going to end the broadcast. Just say bye, everybody, and we'll see you on Wednesday with Andy.
Peace out.
See you guys.